Today I'm going to show you how I painted this beautiful kingfisher bird in watercolour. Let's get the brushes wet and let's get started. Now the colours I'm going to be using today are by Regina's Watercolours, which are lovely rich honey based pigments. And this one consists of 20 different handmade colours, including a glass mixing palette inside the lid. Regina's link is down below in the description. Okay, the first thing you need to do is fold over one corner of your printout. Just makes it easy to get hold of, you know. And lightly tape that printout down on top of your watercolour paper. And underneath that I've got some graphite back paper as well. Then using a medium pressure, transfer it through. And you can do the entire image in this case as well. Make sure you've got your reference photograph in front of you so you can fine tune where you want to put those details. Because sometimes with a printout, the edges are not always that easy to see. Then you'll end up with something like this, and you can see I've got the basic details there ready to go. And all I need to do is put a bit of an outline around this, because I'll be putting a background on the paper. I want sort of a nice sharp edge to that background. Okay, Delphinium Blue. Delphinium Blue. I've never heard of some of these names, I really haven't. Delphinium Blue. Rosemary & Co. Series 31520 brush. One of my favourite brushes to use. I just want to go over the pencil marks over the outline drawing first of all. At least that way around it helps sort of make sure the pencil marks stay put on the paper. Because I'll be applying quite a lot of washes over the top of this. And I know that as soon as you put water on the top of pencil, very often it dissolves or just disappears on you. So this will just help those pencil marks stay put on the paper. Well, most of the time anyway. Then very lightly using a size 6 brush, this one came with the kits from Regina's Watercolours, put a first layer of this Delphinium Blue onto the bird. Then I'm going to go for Aqua. Now this is more of a sort of greeny tone, isn't it? Like a greeny blue. But more on the green side than the blue side. So I'm going to sort of mix this in with the Delphinium at the same time. Now the good thing about all these colours I'm going to be using today is that you can make up your own colours. You can use whatever colours you've got within your palette. And I do have a video here on YouTube on how to compare the colours that you've got with a painting tutorial that uses different manufactured colours. So have a look at that video if you're not sure how to do that. And that's the one I've just popped up on the screen for you. I know, magic, isn't it? So basically what I'm doing here, I'm just going over all the areas which are blue initially, but kind of varying that colour slightly. Now I'm going to go for a lovely rich red colour. Now this one, I believe is called Rose. I don't need a great deal of this just yet, because as you can see on the wings, the colour changes a little bit, doesn't it, underneath? But this is going to be more for the bottom of the wings. And all I need to do now is fine tune those blue washes. This is just that foundation wash. This gives us just something to build over the top of as well. And by building up these washes bit by bit, step by step, one layer at a time, to gradually increase the depth of those washes, you can start to add a little bit of shape to that bird at this very early stage. Right, let it dry. Gotta let it dry. And now we can make a start on some of those details. Here we go. Poppy and sunflower. And nice colours they are as well. I'm going to make some more to a watery consistency at this stage. Now we know we've got that lovely orange on there, as we can see. So I want to make sure that we've got the basic foundation colour on there, ready to receive the details over the top. Remember, these are the colours that we see behind the scenes, so behind those lovely fine feather details. So all about careful adjustments all the time. Then give it a quick dry. Now, what should we use? I'm going to go for chocolate and mustard this time. Chocolate, yeah, that sounds nice, doesn't it? And you know what? It does look like chocolate as well. It's a lovely colour. I just want to get some basic colour on the branch as well now. So these are all the foundation washes I want to get on the entire painting. At least that way around it's ready to go when we start thinking about adding details over that later on. And that's just by using these two colours at the moment, the mustard and the chocolate, just to make sure we've got some colour on the paper. And we can lighten it, we can soften it, we can do whatever we want to do with that thereafter. Then give it a quick dry. Now the second layer of the foundation wash I'm putting on is mainly to give it a little bit more shape now. And also just a bit more colour. So where I think it's needed, behind the scenes remember, I'm going to add a little bit more colour onto that body. And as you can see, also onto the head as well. Only where it's needed though. Remember with the photograph, look at where it's lightest on that photo. Now don't forget to like and subscribe to this video, because when you do that, there's a good chance that when we put another video on here for you to watch, you shouldn't miss it. Now then, colour wise, coal and chocolate. Coal and chocolate, that's certainly a different one, isn't it? Coal is obviously black, as you can see, and chocolate we've already used. And I'm going to use these to the background. So using a large soft bristle brush, this is a synthetic one by Grabby. I want to add these colours on there and leave them all to a milky consistency. What you have to bear in mind is that because I've wetted that background, I know that it's going to dilute the paint a little bit more. It will soften it down, it will dilute it. And I'm applying this just quite randomly all over the place, leaving gaps in between. switching between the two colours as I go as well. I want it more of a really dark mottled effect, so you can't really see where one colour starts and the other colour finishes sort of thing, you know? And you can only just about make out the brown behind the scenes. If I just use coal on its own, a black colour on its own can look quite flat, can't it? It's a lovely colour black, this one. Then grabbing a size 00 brush, I'm going to fine tune the edge of the Kingfisher as well. Now it's nice and dry, I'm going to put a second layer of those background colours onto the paper. I need it darker than it is now. Remember, it's dried that a little bit lighter, which watercolour very often does. So the first thing I need to do is wet it in patches. So little areas here and there, then start filling those patches in with the colour. Just keep varying those two colours from the brown to the black and vice versa. Then when you get to the edge of the wet area, re-wet it again for another patch, then add the colour in again. So basically you're maintaining a wet edge all the time as you work around that painting. And as you can see, it's much darker now. Once again, wait for it to dry. A little bit of lifting off work here and there with a stiff bristle brush, just kind of fine tune the edge of the branch, and that's finally time to make a start on working on the Kingfisher. And this is where I want to start off with the eye. I do normally like to paint the eye first, you know, because at least then you've got something to look at whilst you're working on the rest of the painting. In this case, I decided to put the foundation washes on the bird first of all, and the background of course, without painting the eye first. Just using the dark mixers and the size 00 brush, painting that eye. Now you've got to think about the overall shape of this eye. It's not completely round, is it? If you put a ruler from one corner to the other corner of the eye, you notice it angles down a little bit as well. Once I've added those fine details with the black, then I'm going to add a little bit of opaque white in there as well. And this is just for those fine highlights. On the photograph, it's not really that bright. I want it to be a little bit brighter on my painting. You know, at the end of the day, we are artists after all, so we can use a little bit of artistic license if we want to. And that's exactly what I'm doing right this minute. Small amounts of opaque white, hardly any water to this white. I want to make sure it's really creamy in consistency. Now this weird looking brush is obviously homemade, and I call it the replicator. The replicator. And this brush is really useful for working with both feathers and for fur, especially for those first layers as well. So you can get a lot of detail on the paper, well, fairly quickly. Not that you should ever rush a painting, of course. Now this replicator brush, I have made a little video on how I made this, by the way, so I'll pop that in the top right hand corner for you. But you can see it gives some very fine details, so extremely handy. Now look at the direction from that reference photograph. You've got to think about which way those feathers grow. And you can see from the top of that, they sort of swirl around towards the eye, don't they? And then you can make a start on adding the darkest layer in there. Now you can see this is really dark blue colour, it's quite rich as well. And I've made this more to a creamy consistency. Using my size 00 brush, whatever small fine tip brush you've got, keep looking back and forth at that reference photograph every few seconds. Look at the patterns on the head. You can see the way they sort of work from the beak all the way through to the back of the head. And near the beak actually all the way to the top of the eye. They're sort of curved lines, so very slightly curved all the way from the beak through more or less to the top of the eye, aren't they? Then we can add a little bit of watercolour white in there. So we've already got some within our mixing palette. And this is just to add the highlights within these blue areas. Now, if the white is a little bit too bright or a little bit too stark, once it's dry, you can add a little bit of blue over the top of that if need be. Now, painting something like this is really good fun, isn't it? Especially when it's a wildlife subject. Now, I've got well over 150 other watercolour wildlife subjects on my Patreon channel. I go through every single video right from the start all the way through to the end for you, show you how to do them as well. So if you fancy being spoiled for choice when looking for a wildlife subject to paint, have a look at the link in the description down below for my Patreon channel. Hopefully, I'll see you there. Aquarium. Is any fish around? I know. Well, we have got a bird after all, which obviously eats fish. A lovely green colour, and I can see why Virginia's called that aquarium. Now for the second layer of detail on the body. Here we go. Now this is using a fine tip brush again, looking at the direction the lines go, looking at the direction the feathers grow. There's a rhyme going on there, isn't there? So you've got to think about that all the time. How long are those lines? How wide are those lines? How thick are those lines? How colourful are those lines? Don't go too colourful too soon. Remember, we're working in layers here. And the more layers that we add, the more realistic and the more depth you get to that subject. You really will. Now using the larger brush, lightly soften that down afterwards, just so we can knock those details back just that little bit. Fuchsia and chocolate. Okay. Let's give those a try, shall we? I can see the colour within my mixing well here is a lovely sort of rich, reddy brown colour, isn't it? That's how it feels anyway. It's quite nice. This colour is quite evident towards the tips of those wings. So dampen the wings down one feather at a time though. one feather. Drop the colour in that one feather on one side of it, then lightly blend it out a little bit. What we're trying to achieve here is more of a sort of deeper tone side, and it gets lighter as it works its way around that feather. You'll see why when we add more details over there later. Now we've got that lovely sort of greeny blue colour, so I'm going to add that to the back first of all, because when you look carefully, and I mean really carefully, that reference photograph, you can see there's not just blue there, there's a greeny blue as well. So you've got to think about where you're going to place those colours. So for example, just below the eye here, we've got more of a blue, that delphinium blue, and then towards the tip of that blue area, towards the left of it below the eye, it's got a hint of green in there as well. The same with the top part of the wing here. You can see there's a hint of green in there. So you've got to think about the colours you're adding all the time, not just for the foundation washes, but also for those details that you apply over the top. Then, finally, we can go for the darkest layers. The darkest layers. The key really is not to go too dark, because if you do, you'll end up having to lift paint off. First thing to do is just be careful with that. Be very cautious where you put those darker tones. Notice in the middle of the back here, we've got that lovely blue flash, which is one of those lovely things about the stunning European Kingfisher. It's amazing when we see them fly down the river, and all you see is a blue flash, and also a very high-pitched call as well. So light this off in this next layer of details down again. Let it dry, then add the next layer over the top of that. So it's all about layering all the time. Start to darken those details. So basically what you're doing, you're thickening down those mixes a little bit more. So make them richer, make them thicker. If you need to add a little bit of coal, in other words black, to that blue, then you can do, just to tone it down a little bit more. So it's not quite as bright blue. So the thicker the paint, the richer the colour. And so those richer colours which we use for the top layers of this bird, or any subject that you want to paint. Now it's got very fine feathers on the wings here, isn't it? Very, very fine feathers. And they're all sort of layered like a tiled roof in a way. So the row below the one above is slightly offset a little bit. And they do vary in shape and size, the way they look. Now it's all about fine-tuning details now, especially as we're working our way now towards the beak. Now the beak is always a challenge to paint. The thing with a Kingfisher, especially this European one, is that the beak is very straight. So I'm trying not to get any warps or curves or anything too much within the beak. Start off with a central line, that dividing line between the upper part of the beak and the lower part of the beak, or the upper mandible and the lower mandible. There you go. Let's get technical, shall we? No. I'm not a technical person. And then start to fill that beak in. First of all, with very light washes of our black colour, coal, okay? And then you can gradually build on the top of that as you work through the process. Notice that the lower part of the beak is darker as well. So it's obviously in the shade there, isn't it? It's all about fine tuning. Now, I've noticed that my beak isn't quite straight enough at the bottom and on the top. So I'm going to lift off a little bit of paint just in certain areas to achieve more of a curve coming around towards the front of the head. Then once that's dry, I can just simply fill that in with a little bit of paint. Doesn't take long. Then a little bit more lifting offward to add highlights towards the beak. Then the beak, as you can see, has got plenty of shape. There's still one thing we need though, white. You know how much I like to use watercolour white. So I'm going to add some white highlights to the very tip of the beak, which you can see in the photograph, and also within the beak as well. You'll be able to see some very fine details, very fine sort of, well, to me they look like scratch marks. They're probably not, I know. But you just see some very fine marks in there. And to achieve this, you need to make sure that the brush is barely loaded, so there's hardly any paint on that brush, so a virtually dry brush. It's all about fine tuning with a little bit of white, and also a small amount of colour over the top of some of that white as well. Now it's time to carry on doing the same thing for all the other orange areas. Doing this one feather at a time though. One feather at a time. Adding in the delphinium in there first of all, and then a little bit of colour over the top of that. I tend to skip a feather in between as well. And the reason why I do that is because you don't want one feather to blend into the other whilst it's still wet. So if you kind of paint one, skip one, paint one, skip one, paint one, skip one, paint. Anyway, yeah, got the idea. Keep doing that throughout the wing. And then at least that way around, by the time you've got to the bottom one, the top feather should hopefully be dry and they can start on the ones in between. There's small amounts of our red colour mixed in with that as well, just to fine tune those washes within those feathers. Once that's dry, you can start to add the dark layer within that wing as well. So the first thing I want to do, which is something I don't normally do, and that's by outlining those feathers. Pardon? That's because I can see the darker marks in between each feather. Outline them first of all, and then you can start to work on each individual feather by gradually blending them together a little bit more. You see what I mean as we go through the process. Then do the same thing on the other parts of the wing as well, in other words the primary feathers. So a small amount of colour, wash that brush out, come back in with a damp, not soaking wet clean brush, then very lightly blend the edge of that colour. Not all of the colour, just the very edge of it. Then keep switching between those colours as you work your way down that wing. Now you also got to think about where it's darker, where it's lighter. So remember to enrich those colours for those darker sides. Don't go to the dark side. Just enrich those colours a little bit for the darker areas, and then you can think about considering the shape all the time. And this is where I can finally add the darkest layer within the body as well. Just using very fine details, a barely loaded brush again, so remember to load it, give it a roll as you pull it away from your mixing palette, and then give it a tap or two, just very lightly, on some kitchen roll. Then you'll have just about enough paint on that brush to be able to work on those finer details. If you've got too much paint on that brush, then you'll find your details are far too thick. Just try and work on different sections as well, because you notice in that reference photograph there's different sections to the tail, and I want to make sure that I get the majority of them sections in. And to be honest with you, it doesn't have to be the same as the photo, it can be similar. That's what you've got to remember, it doesn't have to be the same. There's only you that will compare your painting to your photograph. Now I've noticed a bit of a shadow as well behind the wing over the top of the body, so I'm going to pop that one in as well, just using a small amount of my deep blue colour. Now you've got to put this on fairly swiftly, because if you don't, what will happen is that you'll start to blur the details underneath. So make sure everything's bone dry, and bones and dry bones. Make sure everything's bone dry underneath, then you can add that over the top. Now white highlights the feathers, because I've noticed, with these lovely kingfishers, you've got these lovely patterns within the wing feathers, haven't you? Now they are sort of very pale blue, but adding the white on there allows the blue to show through a little bit, because even though the white is opaque, the colour still shows through depending on the thickness of that white. Now working on the branch, I'm going to wet it first of all and start adding some colours into the mix. And you can change the colours as much as you want when painting wood, you really can, I know. Unless that particular wood, or branch or tree, whatever you're painting, is natural to that bird or animal. For example, you don't want to paint a koala bear on a pine tree, do you? No, you know what I mean? But in this case, you can paint whatever tree you want for this kingfisher, as long as it's a European species. My tree here, well, I'm just going off the photograph really. Just something similar, not the same again. We're using a fine tip brush again, a size 00. Start to add those details in, but again with a barely loaded brush. I'm also thinking about the overall shape of the branch as well. The top right hand corner, I've darkened the branch on both sides because you can just see the light hitting in the middle of that. But as you work your way down horizontally through the bird, you find the darkest area is really on the underside of the branch. Don't forget the shadow. Pop the shadow in behind the kingfisher as well. Remember, it's casting that shadow. Think about the direction the light is hitting that bird. So obviously behind the bird, it'd be really dark, wouldn't it? So fine tune those details, really fine tune them. And then you can add a little bit of opaque white over the top for the top edge of the branch. Just add those very fine highlights in there. And you can see that gives the branch a really lovely round feel. And then that makes that branch look much more 3D. If you'd like me to teach you how to paint a bird step by step in real time, have a look at the link to the top right hand corner of the screen and give that lovely European robin a try. I'll see you there.